Hi, this is Steve Matteo at WUSB. I'm here with Trevor Christian, and today our special guest is Joe Sackman. He's the executive director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. Joe is the chair of the coalition until he assumed the role of chief of staff after the departure of LAPC's former executive director following a 20-plus year tenure. He is a member of the executive committee of NIPAN, is chapter chair of the Nassau County Working Families Party, and was a candidate for the New York State Assembly in 2020. He was also a volunteer for New York State co-director for Wolfpack, as well as national coordinator. And Joe received his Bachelor of Science degree from Stony Brook University. So that's good to hear that. So, Joe, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. And the first thing we'll do is let's talk a little bit about the Long Island Progressive Coalition for people who don't know who it is and what it's about. Maybe you can give us a sense of, touch a little bit of history, but just give us a sense of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Steve. Um, yeah, so the Long Island Progressive Coalition's been around for 40 plus years. It started off with grassroots organizing and unions really looking to center working class issues on Long Island. And there's many campaigns that the coalition has taken on over the years, but the first major one was the Shore Power Plant. And if anyone knows their history around Shore and Power Plant, a lot of concern over that nuclear power plant coming online, and what would we do if there was certain issues that happened. And so there was a big push to make sure it never opened. And so LAPC was part of that campaign. And from there, it just continued to grow. So there are multiple organizations that had joined it, and then as time went on, it just sort of coalesced into just the the organization itself. And we are a 501c3 and a 501c4. And currently, we are our main work is advocacy around economic, social, and environmental justice. We do a lot of work with the New York Renews Coalition around uh, sustainability, green energy, creating green jobs, making sure also that the implementation of the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Protection Act, which would invest money into what has been traditionally and historically communities that have been ignored, what we call DACs. A DAC is a disadvantaged community where they just haven't had the investment. And you can kind of, with the history of Long Island and redlining, you can kind of see a lot of these DACs are those communities of color that have just not had received the resources that they should have received. And so we kind of make sure those communities are getting the attention they need. And like I said, historically, we've also done, the Fight for 15, raising minimum wage on Long Island, the MRTA, which was legalization of cannabis, and a social justice component of that. It's kind of ironic that, that's been implemented, but we haven't seen a lot of communities opt in to the legalization aspect, so the cannabis can be sold legally in the townships and benefit from the taxes that would come from that sale. And the social justice component of that is that the communities that are most affected by when marijuana was illegal would be able to take advantage of those opt-ins. So there's a lot of different things we've done over the years. We're pretty broad in what we advocate for, but it does land on working class and social justice issues.
Okay. So you used the phrase DAC and you mentioned redlining. Could you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, redlining is something that you can go all the way back to like the founding of suburbia, and even in the city. Um, Basically, if you're a person of color, you weren't going to get into a white community. And so they weren't going to sell you a house. The bank wouldn't give you a loan to buy a house or within a white community, and it's racism. Let's call it what it is, racism. And so you would end up seeing that people of color would be sort of shuttled into specific communities where they're like, we'll give you there's a house over here, we'll give you a loan for that one, but the town over, you can't. And I think a great example of that is if you live in Nassau County and you drive through Garden City and go into Hempstead, it's like Wizard of Oz. When Dorothy walks out of the house, when she falls into the Oz, goes from one, the world looks one way and then it looks a different way. Garden City's got broad streets and trees, and it's the air feels different. And then you drive into Hempstead, and green spaces disappear. It's industrialized. It's just underserved, and the village of Hempstead is considered a DAC, disadvantaged community. And I think you can make the correlation that redlining and DAC go together. So just if you need a visualization, think about those communities that you drive through, and you see investment isn't there. The state or the federal government hasn't really invested in these communities. They don't have the political connections or the wealthy connections that would bring attention. I've seen it just even recently in Nassau County. This is more partisan, but it also affects the budget, where they were denying funding for things like parks, etc., to Democratic-controlled districts. But a lot of those are minority-majority districts, which fall into these DACs. So it's just still going on. And also the beaches. The beaches are segregated. If you access to a beach, the Shinnecock is a great example of this. The Shinnecock have to pay to get onto land they already own because the land is theirs, right? And so, if you've got a paywall to get to access something because of the community you live in, that's another form of, I would consider a form of redlining. So,
Okay. So on Long Island, what percentage of people, or I'm not looking for exact numbers, I mean, how many people would be self-identified in Nassau and Suffolk, okay, as progressives? And again, I know you can't maybe give me an exact number, but like percentage wise, or is it part of the Democratic Party? Not is working families aligned with it or not? Is working families and Democrats really aligned with each other? Because I think for some people, you're either a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. There's sort of nothing else. These other sort of subcategories, for lack of a better phrase, are something that people can't necessarily wrap their heads around or don't even really know about it. And then we'll talk about the connotation of progressive and what that means, or what it doesn't mean.
yeah, I was going to start with the connotation of progressive, because how do you define progressive? It's kind of hard when I've heard like Cuomo and even Eric Adams call themselves progressives, and I was like, that does not feel like that's the right line for that. But as I think we get too heavy into labels. So if I'm saying a percentage of people that are progressive on Long Island, I think it's a matter of values and what people are concerned about. And I think for Long Island, it's a lot of the kitchen table issues coupled with the social values that they hold. So I want to say there's a significant number of people that would align with what we would consider progressive values, if we're going to use that term. Because I've been in spaces where they're going to, they're saying, I like AOC, I want AOC to come to Long Island, right? But then I'm also hearing from like Democrat leadership, they're cursing her name, So in the streets, grassroots, some of the clubs I've gone to, like Democratic clubs, and speaking to people, they like her policies, and you could identify AOC as a progressive, you know. So I think it is more about alignment with values and issues than just a blanket. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a progressive, I'm a Working Families Party, and as to speak on the point around the Working Families Party, the Working Families Party was founded to push Democrats left and to flip the state from Republican control. And it was founded with various orgs and unions to make that happen, and has been successful. We got rid of the IDC. If anyone doesn't know what the IDC was, it was 8 Democrats that caucused with the Republicans, handing the state Senate to the Republican control. And this was a mechanism that Andrew Cuomo used while he was governor to basically control what legislation was going to get passed in the state legislature and what would hit his desk. And when people realized, hey, I'm voting for these Democrats, they're caucusing with Republicans, I didn't vote for that. They took them out. And so that changed things there. And the WFP was pretty instrumental in making that happen and trying to hold Democrats accountable to their campaign promises, and also really pushing the issues when it comes to like working class issues, because we are the WFP is really a coalition of organizations and unions and individuals who believe in working class issues. Like the original motto was good jobs, good schools, and good government. I don't think anybody doesn't want that, but they want good jobs, good schools, and good government. So there's the intersection, and there's a tie into all of that. And then I think the second part was like the connotation around progressive, right? So yeah, it seems the definition has kind of been co-opted by anybody who wants to claim it, that they're progressive, but then they don't really express those values. Or you have something like Tom Suozzi, who is like, they're extremists. What's so extreme that I want a fully funded public school? What's so extreme that I want to make sure I have health care? How many people I know are just like, I need health care. That I don't think that's extreme to demand access to health care. And right now, we see what's happening with the federal government, and they're going to pass the big, beautiful bill. It just got out of the Senate. It's going to go to the House again. Probably 17 to 18 million people are going to lose their health care, in the next few years. Medicaid, Medicare. We're going to lose access to SNAP. And, I don't think it's extreme at all to say that we deserve health care, that it's a human right. Housing is a human right. I was just at the Rent Guidelines Board in Nassau County last night. We have 7,000 plus rent stabilized apartments in Nassau County. And, only one county legislator has shown up to the hearings. That was Carrie Salages. I hadn't seen any other legislator out there concerned about housing. I mean, a majority of the people in rent stabilized apartments are seniors, they're on fixed income, et cetera. And what's going to happen to the federal government with the cuts that are coming, and then they're raising their rent because they raised their rent last night. It's an economic threat to these people. So it's not extreme.
In Democratic primaries, for the most part, the people getting out and going into the general election are the Tom Suozzi, Laura Gillen types. Uh, and in terms of the people making it into Congress are even more the Tom Suozzi, Laura Gillen types, if not the George Santos, Lee Zeldin types. So, what is it exactly that progressives can do on Long Island to change the rightward drift of every single politician, essentially?
That's a really good question. I think for Long Island, what we have is that Long Island is almost like a petri dish, right? For right wing conservatism to put out their narrative and test things. We see this happening in Nassau County, especially where they're doing trans bans, mask bans, militias for the county executive. It's like a testing zone, and it's a testing around their narrative and where they push. And so you have this right wing narrative that has just been really honed here on Long Island. And you have Democrats that adopt a like Republican light narrative, and they have kind of tried to court Republican voters to because Republican voters always do come out when it comes to voting in the general, and they have kind of disengaged the base, their own base. So if you're not hearing the things that you care about from the people who you think you would vote for, you kind of like, oh, I'm not going to vote for that person, and so they end up losing a lot, Democrats in that sense, because they're like, Republicans always vote Republican, right? And for progressives, progressives are the ones that usually you see hitting the doors and going out there and talking about the issues and really pushing. I mean, on Long Island, there's a lot of people that came out for Bernie, other. I've seen a lot. I've done a lot of. Let me premise with this. I've done a lot of interviews of candidates over the last 8 years for the Working Families Party who are looking for our endorsement. We try to align with those who align with our values, and who are not also going to take the conservative line, because you'll see that because we do have a narrative. It's working class issues. It's social justice issues, the things that people really care about, and building, I think, that narrative that does not exist because it's not being adapted by the status quo Democrat. They are not really interested in that. And they're not interested in really pushing against the conservative narrative. They're more interested in adapting it. I mean, if you look at last cycle, Swazi and Gillen in Nassau County, and then in CD1, John Avalon, they all pretty much had a very conservative, campaign. I mean, even so, where I even questioned, am I getting a Trump mailer? Because that's what it looked like. It's like build the wall type stuff with immigration. And look what we've got now. ICE is all over, grabbing people and tearing families apart, citizens, etc. And we're not getting any real support from our Democrats around this locally. Even so much so, there's an eerie silence when it comes to leadership. That if leadership even exists around this, it's more people in the streets, communities coming together around that. And when you get when you get a progressive who does end up running, their biggest hurdle is usually the machine, the political machine that doesn't want to change the way things are. It's kind of strange. It seems they're happy with their own status quo, which is like Republican conservative viewpoints. I mean, it was so far as to Nassau County and Suffolk County last year ran the common sense line, right? So that was a ballot line that got them no votes, but the WFP got 12%, I think it was, and which showed that there's a value to that line for those who are running, and that's because the people who vote on that line only vote on that line because they want to make sure that who they're electing, aligns with their values. And so for progressives, it's like we are trying to redefine what the narrative is on Long Island, and that is we're dealing with an affordability crisis. We need, everyone talks about affordable housing. What does that mean? Right? It's like, shouldn't be more than 20% if you want to go number wise, 20, 25% of your income. But building more housing doesn't solve that problem by saying we just got to build more housing, right? It's like no, you build more housing and you're charging $4,000 for a studio apartment. That's not affordable, So we need to build, housing that's look at models that we've had in the past with social housing, and no one likes that word social housing, right? Because it has a connotation to it, but it's very successful when municipality builds housing for people and keeps the price at where it needs to be so people can afford to live there. Creating jobs, is another thing. Dealing with property taxes, it's things that Long Islanders care about. Well, how do we address these things? How do we come up with solutions? And I think that's the other thing. We don't see politicians really delivering solutions and how they're going to implement them. They're more about buzzwords and uh, you know, and not really providing them. I think we saw recently with Mamdani's, Zoran's election. He came in as like, I want free buses, and we know how to do it. It's been done elsewhere. They've, and we can pay for it. We know how to pay for it. And that really is what he did. He addressed universal material issues. And I think you'll hear more of that from progressives, in the future, because that's what people care about.
So, um, I guess what I'm hearing from you, but I want you to clarify, do you think that Democrats should be competing for a right-leaning vote and try to out anti-immigration a Republican, or should they be competing for a left-leaning vote and instead of trying to activate those conservative voters, be trying to do what Mamdani did and bring out actually not just what Mamdani did, but what Donald Trump did and bring out a large number of people who weren't previously super engaged?
Well, I don't think Democrats or anybody should be doing what they're doing with immigration right now. That is horrific, right? What we, any Democrat that has lent their any energy to that narrative has helped destroy families and also harmed our own economy. It's very myopic, just to gain votes. What the result of that is that there are families being torn apart. People that lived here for decades. They're taxpayers, and to try to court Republican votes, conservative votes on issues like that, these crises that don't exist. These are made up crises, right? The trans crisis, etc. Like there's not a crisis here, but they're leaning into it because they want to get Republican votes because they see, well, these people come out to vote. Well, you know what? Put some effort into what you're doing and what you're running for, and come out as a genuine candidate and really address what we need. We need leaders. I don't care what party you're in. Come in with solutions for what we need. Run on that. You will engage people there. I think there's a great example. I'm going to go back to Zoran. Like right after the Trump election, he went into the district because he shares part of his district with AOC, and he interviewed people like, "Who'd you vote for? Voted for Trump. Who'd you vote for Congress? AOC." Well, they're two different people. They heard the populist economic message that Trump was putting out, which we know is BS, but they really were feeling the pinch economically. And then they said, well, why'd you vote for AOC? Well, she works for us. She really helps us in our district, right? So it's not so much about the partisanship. It's about what they're doing for the people. We need leaders who are going to serve us and not oligarchs and corporations, etc. So, that's something we definitely need.
Okay, this is Steve Matteo with Trevor Christian here on WUSB 90.1 in Stony Brook, and we're talking with Joe Sackman. He's the executive director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. So again, that word progressive, I hear a lot of populism when I hear progressive policies, but a lot of people hear progressive, or not, however many people, they hear it and it sounds it sounds elitist. It sounds too far out. It sounds like, oh, extreme and all of this kind of thing. So, how do you answer that if somebody says, well, that's not populism. I want populism. This sounds kind of far out to me when I hear progressive.
It's a really good question. I mean, what I tend to do is if someone says I don't really identify so much as a progressive as more as a leftist, right? Telling you on the spectrum where do I sit politically, you know, as a leftist and as a socialist. I believe in socialism because socialism is the strengthening of democracy, more democracy in the workplace, more democracy in our lives. It's an economic, more democracy in our economy, right? So more say in what happens to you. That's my perspective. That's how I answer it personally, right? And I usually say most people are socialists that don't know it yet, because when you ask them about what do you care about, and it's like, well, I guess I said it earlier in the interview, like, well, I want to make sure I got a job. I got health care. I got, put food on the table. My kids can get what they need. It's those kitchen table issues, which also seem to lend itself to populism, right? Because that's what we need. If you're talking about the stuff that people really need, that becomes a populist message, right? Because it's the majority of what we're all concerned about. And you can leave the partisanship out of it. Bernie Sanders did an awesome populist message, economic message, but also, it was talking to what people were concerned about. Trump stole that style, right, and put it into his first run. And when Bernie was out, I had heard so many people go, well, I'm not voting for Hillary. I'm going to vote for Trump, because he was talking the talk that Bernie was talking, about jobs and the economy and making life better. And Trump didn't have solutions, though. So that's the problem with that populism. It's just talk, right? And so, but Bernie had solutions. He's like, we're going to do Medicare for all. Everyone's going to get health care. And this is how we're going to pay for it. So his populism was coupled with the solutions, and which we've seen in other successful campaigns like Mamdani, Zoran.
Well, that's a good place right there to let's talk about this Mamdani candidacy, because it is the hugest political issue right in the middle of 100 other major issues. I mean, and I'll just be brief here. There are so many Democrats who have come out against this guy, quite frankly. And of course, Republicans, this guy is, the devil incarnate. He's a communist and all of this stuff. So, I've read a lot about him. And I mean, there's certain things I'm not entirely comfortable about. There's also certain things that he wants to do that there isn't going to necessarily be the political will to do it, perhaps. But I mean, we're talking about the mayor of New York City. We're not talking about the president of the United States. We're not talking about the governor of Nebraska. We're talking about Manhattan. We're talking about the mayor. And what was interesting, and then I'll turn this over to you, Joe. There's so many things about this guy that are very similar to the current mayor of London, and that seems to be working out quite well. So tell me what your feeling is, both how you feel about him, what your reaction is to the Democratic response, particularly right here on Long Island, okay? And where do you think where does this go, and how does this fit into the entire complicated political situation that we find ourselves in right now?
Another good question. Well, first I'm going to say the mayoral race of New York City is important in many aspects because, one, I think it's an indicator of where the state could be going, especially in the gubernatorial race. And that there's interest politically there for people to make sure that somebody who aligns with the governor, Kathy Hochul, would fit in. Andrew Cuomo, I mean, if he won, I don't know if he really would have aligned with her too much. I mean, he's thrown out of politics for very specific and good reasons. But he's trying to come back, and his win would have shifted us further to the right. Mamdani's win is saying, like, look, we need to do things that are going to affect the lives of everyday people, and not just the wealthy few. Like, there's been, even on the state level, to reform our basically our income tax. Back in 2020, I was part of a campaign called Invest in New York. He was part of that campaign when he got elected, and as a state assembly member, and that was to raise enough revenue so we can fully fund our schools, to put money towards childcare, et cetera. And everyone said the billionaires, the millionaires, they're going to run. They didn't run. We have more and more millionaires now. He brings that up in his interviews today. And this is important because we really need to recenter the working class in our politics and have the political will to serve the needs of the many and not just the very wealthy few. And New York is a very unique city, and having a mayor like Zoran, I think, is going to do that. It's going to recenter where our politics should be, and that is on the working class. And I consider anybody who's like punching in, whether you're a doctor or you're the guy picking up the garbage, you're working class. Because we're all working for somebody, right? So that, to me, working class is a very broad term. I know traditionally it's usually like the white collar worker, et cetera. But I think the way things are today, we're all pretty much working class.
What about the aspect of where he stands in terms of the Middle East, in terms of Israel, in terms of Palestine? There are some flashpoints there that I think make some people uncomfortable, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, well, first of all, let's take a step back 5 years ago. We wouldn't even be broaching this subject, in these elections. It would be talked about very little, just because, do you support Israel? And everyone would say yes, right? But the reality is, what the government of Israel has been doing is a genocide. And I'm not going to retract that. That is the reality. The world has watched the Palestinian people in Gaza be murdered and starved. I mean, I've never seen so many dead babies in my life. And at first it was like, is it real? It's real, right? That the horrors that are being seen by the world because of social media is undeniable. And so, there is definitely an influence from lobby groups like AIPAC on a lot of our electeds. That's true. Jamal Bowman lost his race because of that. Nina Turner lost her race because of this. They're attacking him now. And what I find kind of disgusting is that we have electeds like Laura Gillen or Senator Gillibrand, like regurgitating some of those talking points, which are very Islamophobic. And weaponization of anti-Semitism makes things even worse. Like, we have to fight hate on every level. And I think his responses to those issues has been, very well thought out. Isn't just a knee-jerk reaction. He's really thought about his stances. He's expressed them, and he constantly gets attacked. Like the mayoral, when they did the debate, and they're like, "What are you going to do when you win the election?" Everyone's like, "I'm going to go to Israel," right? And he says, "I'm going to stay home and I'm going to work for the city." And then that wasn't acceptable. And they went after him and says, "You don't believe Israel should exist?" And he says, "No, it should exist. It should exist as a state with equal rights," right? Because it's an apartheid state. So, we fought, against apartheid states in South Africa, like back in the 80s. And why is it acceptable that it should exist, especially if somebody's our ally, right? We have to fight, those issues where we see them, even here at home. And he's made it very clear that public safety, and I've been on interviews with him for NIPAN. He's made it very clear he's concerned about the safety of all New Yorkers. And that's not an acceptable answer to some of the Democrats, which is ridiculous. I truly believe, especially his plan for public safety, to increase public safety, and he was like 800% the funding he wanted to give, where it'd be like addressing hate crimes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not like you can't give it to the cops to do all that. You need social workers. You need people who can reach out to communities, et cetera. That's where you get preventative crime. You work on that. You get people out there who know how to handle that. Like we didn't need that guy on the subway to I can't remember their names, but the guy was from Long Island. The other guy I think was from the Bronx. He was having a mental breakdown, and he choked him out and killed him. That could have been avoided, right? If we had the resources, in the right places, and that's what we want. Like we want to talk public safety. Again, good jobs, good schools, good government. Right? You put money into those things, put money into the resources communities need, and crime goes down automatically. But the counter, argument from a lot of centrist Democrats is we need more cops. We need more cops. Nassau County's police budget just for Nassau County Police Department alone is over $1 billion, and I think the same is for Suffolk. It's over $1 billion, not counting all the other police departments. How much more money are you going to throw to cops to do stuff? I don't get it. Like last night, the Rent Stabilization Board, I walked into that. There was a dozen cops standing around for a rent guidelines board meeting. It's like 20, 30 people just sitting there waiting to hear whether or not their rent's going to go up. Like we're going to have a riot or something like that. It was kind of ridiculous, over policing. Patchogue, the other day, snipers on the roof. They had their, was it alive after 5, right? And I think that might have been in response to an anti-war rally at Garbarino's that same time. So, it's really like, where are we putting our money? And I think that's where we're addressing that. Our money should be going towards communities, and we'll live in a better and a safer world. I mean, I've done some mentoring with high school students about that, just pure mentoring, preventative, was it an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So it's like coming up with new and novel ways where you don't have to have the reaction of a police department to after the fact the shooter's already there. Get to them before they even become a shooter,
Can we address specifically? I feel like there are plenty of comments that, I have respect for in terms of maybe if someone is to the right of Mamdani, not liking a specific policy. The one I really want to focus on is, I guess the Senator Gillibrand quote that he was going to spread global jihad. That one to me uh, just took on a different dimension than anything policy related. Um, are we living in a Democratic Party where Islamophobia is advisable?
For some Democrats, I think it is. There's such an anti-Arab, anti-Islamic rhetoric that goes on. I think this goes all the way back to 9/11, where if you're from the Middle East, you're a terrorist. It's ingrained in some of these people in the way they view the world, especially if they are being lobbied by some groups that want that narrative, right? I mean, I think that's a reality we can all see. When you're being told like these people are evil, so you don't trust them or their animals. I hear that from people here about the Palestinians, and it's kind of gross. It isn't kind of gross. It is gross. And when I see somebody like Laura Gillen talk about immigrant families the way she's talked about immigrant families, I'm not surprised that racism exists within the party. I mean, we've heard party leadership talk about India Walton in a racist way when she ran for Buffalo mayor and she won the primary, and they wouldn't get behind her. This was a couple of years ago, and it was definitely she was compared to David Duke, head of the KKK. So white supremacy and racism is alive and well in both parties. I truly believe that.
And what are your thoughts when you see Kathy Hochul, an elected Democrat, come out and disown Senator Gillibrand's comments?
I think that's great. I think it should be disowned. I think she did a good thing there. I mean, it's at least she's recognizing that all New Yorkers need to be respected and protected, and that Gillibrand, her rhetoric is creating division.
Okay, well, we've had Joe Sackman here today. He is the director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. I'm Steve Matteo. Trevor Christian is also here. This is WUSB in Stony Brook at 90.1. And Joe, thank you. And folks, we'll see you again next time. Bye bye.